My daughter-in-law smiled proudly as she handed her parents a printed introduction card for everyone at the dinner table. Under my son's name, it said project manager. Under hers, marketing director. Then I saw mine. Lindsey Rivera, unemployed. The entire table went quiet for half a second before her mother gave me that soft little pity smile rich people use when they think your life failed. My son lowered his eyes and said nothing. Not one word. I smiled through the humiliation and finished dinner in silence. But the next morning my son called me crying. Not because he felt sorry, because overnight his wife's family discovered who I really was. If you've ever been disrespected by family, I want you to stay with me for this story. And please tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I always read them before bed. Don't forget to like and subscribe if stories about family betrayal, strength, and emotional justice speak to your heart. My name is Lindsey Rivera, and for most of my life I believed that if you loved your family hard enough, sacrificed enough, and stayed strong enough eventually that love would come back to you. I was wrong. Not completely wrong, but wrong enough to break my heart at 63 years old in the middle of a luxury restaurant, while my daughter-in-law labeled me unemployed like I was some burden nobody wanted to claim. The strange part is, I almost laughed when I first saw the word. Not because it was funny, because if someone had told 25-year-old Lindsey Rivera that one day she'd be humiliated for not having a job, she would have stared at them in disbelief. Back then, work was my entire life, especially after Miguel died. My husband suffered a massive heart attack when our son Ethan was only 11 years old. One moment. Miguel was standing in our kitchen making coffee before work, humming an old Frank Sinatra song off-key like he always did. The next moment he was on the floor. I still remember the sound the coffee mug made when it shattered. I remember Ethan screaming. I remember kneeling beside my husband begging him not to leave me. And I remember the terrifying silence after the ambulance doors closed. There are some sounds grief never lets you forget. After Miguel died, people treated me differently almost overnight. Before I was part of a happy middle-class couple trying to build a future together. Afterward, I became the widow with the kid. People tilted their heads when they spoke to me. They offered pity instead of respect. What nobody saw was how terrified I was every single day. I worked at a shipping logistics company back then. Nothing glamorous. I started in scheduling and inventory management. The hours were brutal. The pay barely covered the mortgage, groceries, and Ethan's school expenses. But I refused to let my son feel poor. I worked mornings, nights, weekends, anything they offered me. Sometimes I slept in my office during storms because driving home and back wasted gas money. Sometimes I missed Ethan's school events because I was stuck fixing emergency freight problems at 2 a.m. And every single time it happened, I hated myself for it. One night, when Ethan was 14, I came home after midnight and found him asleep on the couch waiting for me. The television was still on. His homework sat unfinished beside him, and there was a plate in the microwave with a sticky note attached. Dinner for Mom. I cried so hard in that kitchen I thought my ribs would crack open. But I kept going. Because mothers do that. We keep going even when nobody notices we're drowning. Over the years, I climbed higher in the company. I became regional operations manager, then senior director. By the time I retired, I was one of the few women in executive leadership. Men who once ignored me suddenly wanted my opinion in meetings. Companies that once dismissed me started recruiting me. And slowly, quietly, I began investing. Not flashy investments. I didn't buy yachts or designer handbags or vacation homes in Aspen. I invested carefully, patiently. Warehousing companies, transportation software, small logistics startups nobody paid attention to yet. I learned something important during those years. The loudest rich people usually weren't the smartest ones. The truly wealthy people rarely needed to prove anything. So while people around me upgraded houses every few years, I stayed in the same brick home Miguel and I bought decades ago. While other retired executives drove luxury SUVs, I kept my old Lexus. I liked my quiet life. Morning coffee on the porch, my small garden, Sunday church, dinner with friends. That should have been enough. But somewhere along the way, simplicity became embarrassing to my daughter-in-law. Vanessa Collins Rivera entered Ethan's life like sunshine at first. Beautiful, polished, confident. The kind of woman who always looked camera-ready even at brunch. And in the beginning, I truly loved her. She made Ethan laugh again. After years of watching my son bury himself in work, it felt good seeing him happy. But little things started bothering me after the wedding. Not obvious things, tiny things. Vanessa never directly insulted my house, but she constantly suggested upgrades. You'd love a modern kitchen, Lindsey. This neighborhood used to be nice. You should really let Ethan help you move somewhere more upscale. At first I brushed it off, then came the questions. So many questions. Did Miguel leave life insurance? Have you updated your will? Who handles your investments? Are you planning to leave the house to Ethan? The questions always came wrapped in sweetness. But I noticed something else too. Vanessa never asked emotional questions. She never asked how I survived losing Miguel. Never asked what sacrifices I made. Never asked what Ethan was like as a little boy. Only finances, assets, ownership, security. One Christmas, she walked through my home looking strangely distracted. Finally, she asked, "You really still keep all the original furniture?" I smiled. Most of it. She touched Miguel's old recliner with visible discomfort. "You could afford better." I remember staring at her for a moment before answering softly. "Some things are valuable because they're loved." She didn't understand what I meant. And honestly, I think that was the first moment I realized Vanessa and I spoke completely different emotional languages. To her, value meant appearance, status, presentation. To me, value meant sacrifice, memory, loyalty. Ethan noticed the tension sometimes, but he always avoided conflict. That was his weakness. My son hated discomfort. Even as a child, he tried to keep peace at all costs. After Miguel died, Ethan became overly sensitive to tension inside the house. If I cried, he panicked. If someone argued, he shut down. I think part of him believed conflict destroyed families. So instead of confronting problems, he learned to smooth them over, to minimize, to excuse. And Vanessa understood that better than anyone. About 6 months before that dinner, I noticed another change. Vanessa stopped introducing me as a retired executive. Instead, she started saying things like, "Ethan's mom doesn't work anymore," or "she's just home most of the time now." Tiny little edits to my identity. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. Until one afternoon at a charity luncheon, I overheard Vanessa speaking to one of her friends. "She's sweet," Vanessa whispered, "but honestly, she's kind of old-fashioned. She doesn't really do anything now." I stood frozen behind a hallway corner, holding my purse so tightly my fingers hurt. She doesn't really do anything now. Funny how people measure usefulness. I wanted to confront her that day. I almost did. But Ethan looked so happy lately. And mothers have a dangerous habit of swallowing pain to protect their children from it. So I stayed quiet. I stayed quiet right up until the night Vanessa handed her parents that little introduction card and reduced my entire life to one humiliating word: unemployed. And somehow, that word hurt less than seeing my son say nothing at all. 3 days before the dinner, Vanessa called me while I was watering the roses in my backyard. I remember because it was one of those quiet Georgia evenings where the air feels heavy with summer heat, and for a few peaceful minutes life almost seems kind again. "Hi, Lindsey," she said brightly. Not Mom, never Mom, just Lindsey. I pressed the phone between my shoulder and ear while adjusting the hose. "Hi, Vanessa. We're still on for Friday night, right?" "Of course. Perfect." She hesitated for a second. "Oh, and there's kind of a dress code." I smiled faintly. "A dress code? Well, not officially." She laughed lightly. "I just mean my parents are a little formal." "That's fine. And maybe wear something simple." Understated, something about the way she said understated made my stomach tighten. I looked down at myself. Gardening gloves, old jeans, Miguel's faded college sweatshirt I still wore on cool evenings. "I think I can manage understated," I said carefully. She laughed again, but this time it sounded forced. "Oh, and one more thing. Here it comes," I thought. "Please don't talk too much about business stuff with my parents." I blinked slowly. "What business stuff?" "You know, your old executive stories, investment conversations, things like that." I turned off the water completely now. Why would that matter? "It doesn't," she said quickly. Too quickly. "I just want the night to feel relaxed." Relaxed. That word people use when they actually mean controlled. I stayed quiet. Then she added the sentence that sat in my chest like a stone for the next 72 hours. "My parents can be a little judgmental sometimes." I almost laughed at the irony. Not because her parents were judgmental, because she was warning me like I was the embarrassing part of the evening. After we hung up, I stood in the backyard staring at my roses longer than I should have. Miguel planted those bushes the summer Ethan turned 8. Back then, we used to dream about growing old together in this house. Funny how life changes the shape of every dream. That night, Ethan called me too. His voice sounded distracted, tired. "You okay, Mom? I'm fine." "You sure?" I hesitated. Why does Vanessa not want me talking about my career silence? Tiny silence. The dangerous kind. "She just wants things to go smoothly, Friday," he said finally. "That doesn't answer my question." He sighed softly. Mom, her parents are kind of intense, and Vanessa worries they'll compare people. I leaned back in my porch chair slowly. Compare people. There it was. Not even hidden anymore. She thinks your own mother will embarrass her, I asked quietly. No, that's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying, Ethan? Another silence. I just need this dinner to go well. Not, you won't embarrass anyone. Not, I'm proud of you. Just, I need this dinner to go well. I suddenly felt very tired. You know, I said softly, there was a time you introduced me to people like I hung the moon. His voice cracked a little. Mom, when did you stop being proud of me? That's not fair. No, I whispered. Maybe it isn't. We ended the call politely, but something cold stayed behind after the conversation ended. The next day, I met my friend Rebecca Lawson for lunch. Rebecca had been my attorney for years, but more importantly, she'd been my closest friend since our 30s. She was one of the few people who knew exactly how much money I actually had. Not because I bragged about it, because she handled most of the legal paperwork. We sat at a small cafe near Piedmont Park, and within 5 minutes she narrowed her eyes at me. What happened? Nothing. Lindsey. I smiled weakly. Apparently I'm socially inappropriate now. Rebecca lowered her coffee cup slowly. Oh no. I told her about Vanessa's phone call, the dress request, the warning not to discuss business, the weird tension. Rebecca listened quietly. Then she said something that stayed with me. Women like Vanessa don't hate simplicity, Lindsey. I frowned. What do you mean? They hate simplicity they can't control. I stared at her. Rebecca leaned forward. You intimidate her. I almost laughed. At 63 in orthopedic sandals, you built your own success, Rebecca said bluntly. People like Vanessa depend on appearances. That kind of confidence threatens them. I shook my head slowly. I don't want conflict with Ethan. I know. That's the problem. Rebecca gave me a long look. Lindsey, protecting your son from discomfort is one thing. Letting him slowly disrespect you is another. I didn't answer, because deep down, I knew she was right. That evening, Vanessa posted photos online from some rooftop cocktail event. Designer dress, champagne, hashtags about luxury living, perfect smiles, perfect angles, perfect fake happiness. I noticed something else too. Whenever she posted family photos, she rarely included me anymore. If she did, the captions sounded strangely distant. Family dinner, celebrating together, never. Ethan's mom, never our family, small things. But emotional rejection often arrives in small pieces before it becomes obvious. Friday came faster than I expected. I spent almost an hour standing in front of my closet. Not because I cared what Vanessa's parents thought, because suddenly I cared what Ethan thought. I hated admitting that. At 63 years old, I was still trying to avoid disappointing my child. I finally chose a simple navy blue dress Miguel once loved. Classic pearls, low heels, nothing flashy. Before leaving, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, and for one painful second I saw myself through Vanessa's eyes. Older woman, quiet house, old car, no visible status symbols. Invisible. The thought hurt more than I expected. By the time I arrived at the restaurant downtown, the Atlanta skyline glowed gold against the evening sky. The place screamed old money, crystal chandeliers, valet parking. Women carrying handbags worth more than my first yearly salary. Vanessa greeted me near the entrance wearing a cream-colored designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget back when Ethan was a child. You look nice, she said quickly. Quickly enough to sound surprised. Thank you. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe anyway. Checking, evaluating, calculating. Then she lowered her voice. My parents are already inside and, just, let me lead most of the conversation tonight. I looked directly at her. Vanessa, why are you acting like I'm some kind of problem? Her smile stiffened immediately. I'm not. You are? No, I'm trying to help. There it was again. That word. Help. People become dangerous when they start humiliating you for your own good. Before I could answer, Ethan walked toward us from inside the restaurant. For a brief moment, relief crossed his face when he saw me. Mom. He kissed my cheek quickly. I searched his expression for reassurance, for pride, for anything. But all I saw was anxiety, like he was managing a situation instead of welcoming his mother. And right then, standing beneath the soft golden lights outside that expensive restaurant, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't walking into a family dinner, I was walking into an evaluation, and somehow, I already knew I was going to fail it. The hostess led us through the restaurant with the kind of smile reserved for people who looked expensive. Soft piano music floated through the rooftop dining room. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath golden lights. Beyond the giant windows, the Atlanta skyline shimmered against the dark sky like something out of a movie. Everything about the place whispered money, not comfort, not warmth. Money. Harold and Patricia Collins were already seated when we arrived. Harold stood first, tall, silver-haired, polished, the kind of man who probably practiced firm handshakes in mirrors when he was younger. "Lindsey," he said with a smooth smile. "Finally, nice to meet you properly, you too." Patricia stayed seated half a second longer before rising gracefully. She wore diamonds large enough to make a statement without needing words. Women like Patricia never needed to say they thought they were superior. They carried it in their posture. "Oh, Vanessa told us so much about you," she said warmly. That sentence should have comforted me. Instead, it unsettled me immediately, because something in her tone felt rehearsed. We sat down and almost instantly the performance began. Patricia talked endlessly about charity galas, private wine tastings, and vacations in Tuscany. Vanessa practically glowed beside her mother. Every few minutes, she'd glance toward me nervously, like she was monitoring whether I might embarrass her somehow. Ethan mostly stayed quiet. That hurt too, because my son used to fill silence so easily around me. When he was little, he'd tell me every random thought in his head. Dinosaur facts, basketball statistics, weird dreams he had. Now he barely looked at me across the table. A waiter poured wine into crystal glasses. Patricia smiled at me politely. "So, Lindsey," she asked, "what keeps you busy these days?" Simple question, normal question. But before I could even open my mouth, Vanessa answered for me. "Oh, she's unemployed now." The word landed on the table like broken glass. Unemployed. Not retired. Not consultant. Not investor. Not former executive. Unemployed. I felt the air leave my lungs slowly. Patricia's face changed instantly. Not cruel. Somehow worse. Sympathetic. "Oh," she said softly. "Well, retirement can be difficult emotionally for some people." Retirement. Vanessa couldn't even let me have that dignity either. Harold gave a slow nod. But family support matters most at that stage of life. At that stage of life. I stared at my wine glass because suddenly I couldn't trust my own face. Beside me, Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Say something," I begged silently. "Anything. Tell them who I am. Tell them what I survived. Tell them I built a career while raising you alone. Tell them your mother mattered." But he said nothing. Vanessa smiled tightly and reached into her purse. "Oh, I almost forgot. Mom wanted us to make little family introductions. Just something fun. Fun." She handed folded cards around the table. I unfolded mine slowly. At the top were photos and descriptions. Harold Collins, founder and CEO, Collins Development Group. Patricia Collins, philanthropist and community board member. Vanessa Collins, Rivera marketing director. Ethan Rivera, senior project manager, then mine. Lindsey Rivera, unemployed widow. For a moment, the restaurant noise disappeared completely. I read the words 3 times. Unemployed widow. Like my entire identity could be reduced to loss and uselessness. Not mother, not survivor, not executive, not woman, just unemployed widow. I looked up slowly. Vanessa was pretending not to watch my reaction, but she was. Oh, she was absolutely watching. Patricia reached over and touched my hand lightly. There's no shame in slowing down at our age. Our age. I almost laughed. Patricia couldn't have been more than 5 years younger than me. The difference was she had spent her life being financially protected. I spent mine fighting. Harold took a sip of wine before speaking again. "You're fortunate Ethan is successful," he said. "A lot of older people struggle financially these days." Something sharp twisted inside my chest. Fortunate. I remembered sleeping in my office while Ethan was a teenager because I couldn't afford to lose overtime pay. I remembered cutting my own meals smaller so Ethan could eat more. I remembered selling my jewelry after Miguel died. And now I was sitting at a table where strangers assumed I survived because of my son. The irony almost made me dizzy. "I've managed," I said quietly. Vanessa jumped in immediately. "She's very simple, low maintenance, like I was a rescue animal." Ethan finally looked at me then, and what shattered me wasn't cruelty in his eyes. It was fear. Fear of conflict. Fear of upsetting Vanessa. fear of ruining the evening. My son was watching me silently beg for dignity without making a scene. That realization hurt more than the insult itself. Dinner continued somehow. I barely tasted the food. Patricia talked about social clubs. Harold discussed market instability. Vanessa laughed too loudly at everything her father said. And every once in a while, someone would toss me one of those soft, careful comments people use around individuals they think failed at life. So nice Ethan helps you. Family becomes everything when women stop working. You must have so much free time, I answered politely. Always politely, because humiliation becomes strangely numbing after a while. Then came the moment that changed something inside me permanently. Harold leaned back in his chair and smiled at Ethan. "You're a good man," he said. A lot of sons wouldn't take responsibility for an aging parent. I froze. Responsibility, not love. Burden management, that's what they thought I was. I looked directly at Ethan. Please, please say something. Tell them I'm not dependent on you. Tell them I spent decades carrying everyone else. Tell them you know who your mother is. Ethan swallowed hard. Then he smiled weakly and said we do what we can for family. That was it. That was the moment my heart cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically. Quietly. The way old wood splits under too much pressure. Because my son had just allowed another man to believe he financially supported me. And worse. He allowed me to sit there drowning in humiliation to protect his wife's image. Vanessa relaxed instantly after Ethan spoke. Like she'd won something. I suddenly understood everything. The warnings before dinner. The simple outfit request. The weird tension. Vanessa had intentionally created a smaller version of me for her parents. A harmless older widow with no status, no relevance, no accomplishments. Because my real life threatened the image she wanted to sell. And Ethan let her do it. The rest of dinner passed in a blur. At one point, Patricia started describing a luxury retirement community outside Savannah and casually mentioned, "Places like that are wonderful for older women alone." Older women alone. That sentence nearly broke me. Because after all the years I spent fighting to never become helpless, they had already decided I was. When dessert arrived, I folded my napkin carefully and placed it beside my plate. "I'm going to head home," I said softly. Vanessa blinked quickly. "So early, I'm tired." Patricia gave me another pity smile. "Well, thank you for coming." "Thank you for coming?" Like I'd attended some social charity event instead of dinner with family. Ethan stood immediately. "I'll walk you out, Mom." For one foolish second, hope flickered inside me again. Maybe outside away from the table he'd finally say it. Maybe he'd apologize. Maybe he'd defend me. Maybe my son would still be my son. I should have known better. The elevator ride down from the rooftop restaurant felt unbearably quiet. Ethan stood beside me with his hands shoved into his pockets, while soft jazz music drifted through the speakers overhead. Around us, strangers laughed, couples leaned against each other, glasses clinked somewhere behind closed doors. And there I was, a 63-year-old woman trying not to cry in front of her own son. I kept my eyes forward because I knew if I looked at Ethan too soon, I might completely lose control of my emotions. The elevator doors opened into the marble lobby. "Mom." I started walking before he finished the sentence. Lindsey, the valet, called politely from across the entrance. "Your Lexus will be right up." I heard Ethan sigh behind me. "Can we talk for a second?" I stopped near the front doors where the warm Atlanta night air drifted inside every time someone entered the building. The city lights blurred slightly through my vision. I blinked hard. No, not here. I would not cry in front of him. Not after tonight. Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Please don't leave upset." That sentence almost made me laugh. Upset. Like I'd just had a mildly disappointing dinner instead of being publicly reduced to a helpless burden. I looked at him slowly. "Your wife introduced me as unemployed." His jaw tightened immediately. She didn't mean it like that. How exactly did she mean it? She was trying to simplify things for her parents. Simplify. There it was again. That careful language people use when they're trying to make cruelty sound reasonable. She listed me as an unemployed widow, Ethan. She just meant you're retired. "No," I said quietly. Retired was available as a word. She chose unemployed. He rubbed his forehead in frustration. "Mom, please don't make this into a bigger issue than it is." And there it was. The sentence that finally broke something inside me. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "That was wrong." Not, "You didn't deserve that." Just, "Don't make this difficult." I stared at my son in complete silence. For a moment, I didn't recognize him. Not physically, emotionally. This wasn't the little boy who used to wait for me on the couch after late-night shifts. This wasn't the teenager who once punched a kid in middle school because someone called me poor. This was a man so desperate to keep peace in his marriage that he'd sacrifice his mother's dignity to do it. "I embarrassed you tonight," I said softly. "What?" "No, you were ashamed of me." His face changed instantly. Pain flashed across it. Good. For the first time all evening, I wanted him uncomfortable. That's not true. "Then why didn't you say anything I didn't want a scene?" A scene, I repeated quietly. The valet pulled my car toward the curb. Neither of us moved. "I spent 20 years protecting you from scenes, Ethan." He looked down immediately. "When your father died, I protected you from bill collectors, from foreclosure notices, from hearing me cry at night. I worked until my body hurt so you could have stability." His eyes glistened. I continued anyway, and tonight all I needed was one sentence from you. "Mom." One sentence. The pain in his face deepened, but still part of him kept searching for a way to defend Vanessa. I just needed the evening to go smoothly. That did it. Something inside me went completely calm. Not angry, not emotional, cold, clear. I nodded once. "I understand." And I did. More than he realized. I understood that my son had become a man who feared discomfort more than injustice. I understood that Vanessa had slowly trained him to prioritize image over truth. And most painfully, I understood that if I continued allowing this treatment, I would eventually disappear inside this family completely. The valet handed me my keys. "Thank you," I said softly. Ethan stepped closer as I opened the driver's door. "Mom, please don't be like this." I paused. Like what distant? I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. He let his wife humiliate me publicly, and now he feared distance. I looked at him for a very long moment before answering. "You should go back upstairs, Ethan. Your real family is waiting." The hurt on his face appeared instantly. Good. Maybe he needed to feel some of what I felt tonight. I got into the car before he could answer. As I drove through downtown Atlanta, I finally let myself cry. Not loud sobbing, just quiet tears sliding down my face while red taillights blurred ahead of me. The worst part wasn't Vanessa. Women like Vanessa exist everywhere. People obsessed with status always need someone beneath them to feel secure. No. The worst part was Ethan. Because betrayal from strangers hurts your pride. Betrayal from your child hurts your identity. By the time I pulled into my driveway, it was almost 11. My house sat quiet beneath the porch light. The same house where Ethan learned to walk. The same house where Miguel kissed me goodbye for the last time. The same house Vanessa silently judged every time she visited. I sat in the car for several minutes before going inside. The silence wrapped around me immediately. Usually I loved that silence. Tonight it felt enormous. I kicked off my shoes near the doorway and walked slowly into the kitchen. Miguel's old clock ticked softly above the stove. I stared at it for a while. Then I whispered something I hadn't said out loud in years. "I miss you." Because suddenly I did. Desperately. Miguel would never have allowed anyone to disrespect me that way. Not because he was aggressive, because he saw me. Completely. I made tea even though my stomach hurt too much to drink it. Then I walked upstairs toward the study at the end of the hallway. Most people assumed the room was just storage. Even Ethan barely paid attention to it anymore. But inside that room sat the real truth about my life. I unlocked the door. Soft lamplight filled the space. Bookshelves, financial reports, investment files, partnership agreements. Quiet evidence of the life I built after everyone stopped paying attention. I crossed to the old mahogany desk and opened the bottom drawer. Inside sat a black fireproof box. I pulled it out slowly. For a moment, I just stared at it. Then I unlocked it. Folders stacked neatly inside. Property holdings, investment portfolios, legal agreements, private equity documents, and right near the front Collins Development Group. I froze. Slowly, I removed the folder. Harold Collins, Vanessa's father. The same man who spent dinner implying I depended financially on Ethan. The same man whose company was currently seeking emergency funding through Hale Strategic Capital. A firm where I quietly held enough influence to change outcomes. I sat down carefully in the desk chair. Months earlier, Marcus Hale had asked me to review several struggling companies before the board voted on restructuring investments. Most of the files bored me, but Collins Development Group stood out immediately. Too much debt, too much image management, too many hidden financial risks. I'd flagged the file for additional review weeks ago. At the time, I hadn't realized the owner was Vanessa's father. Now the irony felt almost unbelievable. I opened the folder slowly. Inside were updated reports, projected losses, restructuring requests, and a note clipped to the front page. Final board review, Monday morning. I stared at those words for a very long time. Then my phone buzzed beside me. Ethan. I let it ring. A voicemail notification appeared seconds later. Then another call. Then another. I turned the phone face down without listening, because for the first time in years I didn't want to comfort my son. I wanted him to sit inside discomfort, the same discomfort he abandoned me to tonight. I leaned back slowly in my chair and looked around the quiet study. All evening they had treated me like a powerless old woman with nothing left to offer the world. And none of them, not Vanessa, not Harold, not even my own son, had any idea that the future of the Collins family business was sitting right in front of me. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that stupid white card sitting beside my dinner plate. Unemployed widow. 2 words that erased 40 years of survival. Around 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep entirely and walked downstairs in my robe. The house creaked softly around me, old and familiar, carrying memories in every corner. I made coffee and carried it into my study. The Collins Development Group folder still sat open on my desk exactly where I'd left it. For a long moment, I simply stared at it. Then I opened it again. Numbers never lie. People do. The deeper I reviewed the documents, the clearer the situation became. Harold Collins wasn't just struggling financially, he was desperate. The company had overextended itself into luxury commercial properties right before the market shifted. Debt piled up. Investors were nervous, cash flow was shrinking fast, and worst of all, Harold had hidden several losses while continuing to present a polished public image. Classic vanity-driven leadership, the kind that cared more about appearances than stability. The irony almost made me smile. His entire family operated exactly the same way. By sunrise, I already knew what the board would likely recommend Monday morning. Conditional investment, heavy restructuring, strict oversight. And there was only one reason Harold still had a real chance at survival: me. Marcus Hale trusted my judgment more than almost anyone in the firm. We'd worked together nearly 15 years. He once told me something during a negotiation meeting that I never forgot. Most executives make decisions with their ego. You make them with your scars. At the time, I wasn't sure whether that was a compliment or a tragedy. My phone buzzed again around 7:30. Ethan. Third voicemail since midnight. I ignored it. Then the house phone rang. Nobody used my landline anymore except older friends and people trying too hard to seem urgent. I answered carefully. Hello, Lindsey Marcus. Good morning, I said calmly. His voice sounded cautious immediately. You've seen the Collins file? Yes. A pause. You okay? I almost laughed. Marcus knew me too well. Why would you ask that? Because Harold Collins called me at 6 this morning, sounding like a man trying not to panic. Now that interested me. I leaned back slowly in my chair, and he asked unusual questions. What kind of questions? Questions about you? My fingers tightened slightly around the coffee mug. Marcus continued carefully. He seemed very surprised you were on the board review committee. Of course he was. People like Harold never noticed women like me unless we were serving them food or cleaning something. I walked to the window overlooking my backyard. Morning sunlight touched the roses Miguel planted years ago. He met me last night, I said quietly. Silence. Then, oh no. I told Marcus everything. The dinner, the introduction card, the unemployed widow comment, Ethan's silence. Marcus didn't interrupt once. When I finally finished, his voice had gone cold. That woman humiliated you publicly? Yes. And your son allowed it? I closed my eyes briefly. Yes. Marcus exhaled slowly. Well, that certainly complicates things. That was one way to put it. I won't make emotional decisions about the investment, I said firmly. I know you won't, he replied immediately. That's why I trust you. But after we hung up, I sat there wondering whether that was entirely true anymore. Because for the first time in my professional life, this felt personal, very personal. Around 9 o'clock, my front door bell rang. I already knew who it was before opening the door. Ethan stood on the porch looking exhausted. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes red. For one brief second, instinct almost took over. The old maternal reflex: invite him inside, feed him breakfast, protect him from pain. But then I remembered sitting at that restaurant table while he let another man describe me as a financial burden. And the softness inside me hardened again. Mom. I folded my arms quietly. You should have called first. I did. I know. Pain flashed across his face immediately. Good. Maybe discomfort was finally teaching him something. Can I come in? I stepped aside silently. Ethan walked into the house slowly, glancing around like everything suddenly looked different to him. Maybe it did. Maybe now he was finally seeing the life I built instead of the simple packaging around it. I led him into the kitchen. Neither of us sat down right away. Finally, he spoke. Vanessa didn't know. I blinked once. Didn't know that you were. He hesitated awkwardly. This, successful. I stared at him in disbelief. That's your concern right now? She feels terrible. I laughed then. Actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. She feels terrible, I repeated softly. Ethan rubbed his face. Mom, please. No. I want to understand this correctly. My voice stayed calm, which somehow made his anxiety worse. Your wife publicly humiliated me. Your in-laws treated me like a dependent old woman. You sat there in silence. I stepped closer. And your first instinct this morning is to tell me Vanessa feels bad because she accidentally insulted someone important. His face drained of color. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? He opened his mouth, closed it again. Because finally, he realized how ugly this looked. I walked toward the coffee machine slowly. You know what hurts the most, Mom? She never would have treated me that way if she thought I had money. Silence. Dead silence. Because we both knew I was right. I turned toward him again. She thought I was safe to disrespect. Ethan looked sick now. She didn't understand, no. I interrupted quietly. She understood perfectly. I let those words settle between us. She looked at my old car, my clothes, my house, my quiet life, and she decided I had no value. That's not true. Then why was unemployed widow funny to her? It wasn't supposed to sound cruel. I stared at him for several long seconds. Then I asked the question I already knew the answer to. If Harold Collins had believed I owned half the city last night, would he have spoken to me that way? Ethan said nothing. Exactly. I walked to the kitchen drawer and pulled out the folded introduction card Vanessa had handed me at dinner. I placed it gently on the counter between us. Ethan looked at it like it physically hurt him now. Good. It should hurt him. Do you know what your father used to tell me? I asked softly. He shook his head. He used to say that the way someone treats powerless people tells you who they really are. I swallowed carefully. Last night, all of you believed I was powerless. Ethan's eyes filled immediately. Mom, I swear I never meant to hurt you. And for the first time since the dinner, I believed him. That was the tragedy. Ethan wasn't cruel. He was weak. And weak people often create the deepest wounds because they stand quietly beside cruelty and call it peace. His voice cracked suddenly. Harold found out this morning who you are. I said nothing. He's freaking out? Of course he was. Ethan stepped closer desperately. Mom, please, just meet with him before Monday. There it was. Not, are you okay? Not how do I fix this between us, just please help them. I looked at my son very carefully then, and in that moment I realized something heartbreaking. He still didn't fully understand why I was hurt. I stared at Ethan across my kitchen counter and suddenly felt exhausted in a way sleep could never fix. Not physically, emotionally. There's a particular kind of heartbreak that comes when your child grows into someone you no longer recognize. Not because they became evil. That would almost be easier. No. It's harder when they become weak enough to stay silent while someone else hurts you. Ethan looked at me like he was standing between two burning buildings and didn't know which one to save first. Mom, he said quietly, please just hear me out. I folded my arms. I've been hearing you out your entire life. The pain on his face deepened immediately. Good. Maybe for once he needed to sit inside consequences instead of escaping them. He pulled out a chair slowly and sat down at the kitchen table where he used to do homework as a little boy. For one dangerous second, memory softened me. I could almost see 12-year-old Ethan sitting there frustrated over math problems while I cooked spaghetti after 10-hour workdays. But then I remembered Vanessa's voice. She's unemployed. And the softness disappeared again. Ethan rubbed his hands together nervously. You don't understand how bad this is. I laughed quietly. Oh, I understand perfectly. No, I mean the company. There it was again. The company, not me. Not our relationship. Not what happened at dinner. The company. I leaned against the counter. Tell me something honestly, I said. He nodded quickly. If Harold Collins had never learned who I really was, would you still be here right now? Silence. Complete silence. Ethan looked away first. That answer hurt more than words ever could. I nodded slowly. That's what I thought. Mom. It's not like that. Then explain it to me. He stood abruptly, frustration finally cracking through his guilt. Because everything exploded overnight, his voice echoed through the kitchen. The board found out about the connection between you and Harold. Vanessa's parents are panicking. Vanessa's crying. Harold thinks the investment deal is dead and your concern is still them. Ethan stopped talking instantly. I stepped closer. That's what you still don't understand. My voice stayed calm, but inside years of swallowed hurt were beginning to rise. You keep talking about business consequences like that's the tragedy here. Because people's lives are affected, so was mine. He froze. I could see it happening in real time. For the first time since arriving, Ethan was finally being forced to confront the emotional reality of what happened at dinner. Not the financial fallout, the human damage I didn't think he started. No, I interrupted softly. You didn't? The room fell silent again. Outside, a lawnmower hummed faintly somewhere down the street. A dog barked in the distance, ordinary neighborhood sounds. Meanwhile, my entire relationship with my son felt like it was splitting apart in my kitchen. Ethan sat back down heavily. I swear I never meant for any of this to happen. I believe you. He looked surprised. That almost broke my heart again. Because Ethan still thought intention erased damage. But intent doesn't change reality, I continued quietly. You let your wife humiliate me because keeping her comfortable mattered more than protecting me. That's not true. Isn't it? He opened his mouth, closed it again. Because deep down, he knew it was exactly true. I walked to the sink and stared out the window over my backyard. Miguel built that little wooden bird feeder himself the year before he died. Every spring cardinals still came there. Some things remain loyal, even after people don't. You know what the worst part was? I asked softly. Ethan's voice sounded small now. What? It wasn't Vanessa. I turned back toward him. I expected better from you. That hit him hard. I saw it physically land in his chest. His eyes filled immediately. Mom, when your father died, I spent years terrified I wouldn't be enough for you. I swallowed carefully. I worried constantly about money, about your future, about whether I was failing you. Tears slipped down Ethan's face now. I never wanted you to feel ashamed of where you came from. You didn't fail me. Then why did you let them reduce me to nothing? His breathing became uneven. Because I'm tired, he whispered suddenly. The answer caught me off guard. Tired of what, trying to keep everyone happy? There it was. The real truth. Not greed, not cruelty. Cowardice born from emotional exhaustion. Ethan dragged both hands through his hair. You have no idea what Vanessa's family is like. Then tell me. He laughed bitterly without humor. Everything is image with them. Everything. He looked up at me helplessly. The right neighborhood. The right vacations. The right schools. The right friends. Every dinner feels like an audition. That sounded miserable. And suddenly I understood something important. Vanessa didn't just marry into pressure. She was raised inside it. Ethan continued quietly. If you say the wrong thing around Harold, he freezes you out for weeks. Patricia judges everything. Vanessa's constantly terrified of disappointing them. I crossed my arms again, so she offered me up instead. His face twisted painfully because he knew I was right. She shouldn't have done that. But she did. And I should have stopped it. Yes. The honesty of my answer made him flinch. Good. Truth should sting sometimes. Ethan stared down at the kitchen table for a long moment before speaking again. She said your lifestyle made things awkward. I blinked slowly. My lifestyle. She thought her parents would judge. Judge what? That you still live in the same house? That you drive an older car? That you don't look... He hesitated. Rich. He winced immediately. God. There it was. The ugly little truth underneath everything. Vanessa had been ashamed of me because I didn't perform wealth correctly. Not because I lacked value. Because I lacked presentation. I almost smiled at the absurdity. All those years working alongside millionaire executives had taught me something funny. The truly wealthy people rarely dressed like they needed witnesses, but Vanessa's world depended entirely on appearances, and I threatened that illusion simply by existing comfortably outside it. I used to think Ethan Rivera was impossible to manipulate, I said quietly. His eyes lifted toward mine immediately. What? When you were 14, you punched a boy for making fun of my work uniform. A weak smile almost touched his face through the tears. I remember. You came home suspended. You cried. I was proud of you. That surprised him. I nodded slowly. Not because you fought, because you defended someone you loved. My chest tightened painfully. I don't know where that boy went. Ethan broke then, not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly collapsing inward like someone finally too tired to carry the weight of pretending anymore. I'm sorry, he whispered. And this time it sounded real? Not polished, not strategic, real. Tears slid down his face while he stared at the table. I kept telling myself it wasn't a big deal, he admitted shakily, because if I admitted how wrong it was, then I had to admit what kind of husband I've become. I stayed silent, because now we were finally approaching truth. And this morning he continued when Harold found out who you were. He laughed bitterly through tears. Vanessa completely panicked. I could imagine it perfectly. The horror, the embarrassment, the sudden realization that the unemployed widow they mocked had power over their future. What did she say? I asked quietly. Ethan hesitated. Then she said you tricked everyone. I stared at him in disbelief. Tricked them? As if living simply was deception. As if dignity only counted when attached to money. And what did you say? Ethan looked ashamed again. At first, nothing. Of course. But later. He swallowed hard. I told her she was wrong. That mattered. Not enough. But it mattered. He looked up at me again with red, exhausted eyes. Mom, please meet with Harold before the board vote. There it was again. Back to the investment. Back to the crisis. I closed my eyes briefly. Because despite everything, part of him still didn't understand that this was never truly about money. After Ethan left that morning, the house felt unbearably quiet again, but this silence felt different, heavier. Like something fundamental had shifted between us, and neither of us knew how to repair it yet. I stood at the kitchen sink for a long time after the front door closed, staring at the half-empty coffee cup he'd abandoned on the table. When Ethan was little, he used to leave glasses everywhere, too. Miguel would complain jokingly while carrying them back to the sink. One day, he'd say this boy's going to leave a trail of dishes through life. Back then, those little messes felt harmless. Now I wondered what other emotional messes I'd spent years quietly cleaning up for my son. My phone buzzed again around noon. Vanessa. I let it ring. Then came a text. Please let me explain. A second later, I never meant to hurt you. Then, can we talk privately? I stared at the screen for several seconds before locking the phone again. Interesting how quickly cruelty becomes misunderstanding once consequences arrive. By late afternoon, I finally forced myself to leave the house. I drove aimlessly through Atlanta for nearly an hour before ending up at Oakland Cemetery where Miguel was buried. I visited less often these days. Not because I stopped loving him, because grief changes shape over time. In the beginning, it screams. Later, it sits quietly beside you like an old companion. The cemetery was peaceful beneath the soft afternoon sunlight. Birds chirped in nearby trees, while distant city sounds drifted faintly through the air. I stood in front of Miguel's headstone and smiled sadly. Well, I whispered, our son married a woman who thinks I'm embarrassing. The wind moved softly through the trees. I sat down on the nearby bench slowly. You would hate this, I told him quietly, and somehow saying it out loud made tears finally come again. Not violent tears, just tired ones. I don't know when he stopped seeing me clearly, I whispered. That was the real pain underneath everything. Not the insult itself, not even Vanessa. It was the realization that somewhere along the way Ethan stopped seeing me as a full human being with history and dignity. I became background. Convenient, emotionally useful when needed. Invisible when inconvenient. My phone rang again. Rebecca, I answered immediately. How bad, she asked without greeting. I laughed weakly. That obvious you sound emotionally homicidal. That actually made me smile for the first time all day. I told her about Ethan's visit, the tears, the panic, the request to save Harold's company. Rebecca listened quietly. Then she asked the question nobody else had. How are you? Simple question. But it nearly broke me, because nobody in that family had asked me that since the dinner happened. I don't know, I admitted honestly. Rebecca's voice softened. Lindsay, you know this isn't really about money. I know, it's about respect. Yes, exactly that. Respect. Or maybe even visibility. Because humiliation often begins the moment someone stops seeing your humanity. Rebecca hesitated before speaking again. There's something else you should know. My stomach tightened immediately. What Marcus called me earlier. That surprised me. Why? He wanted legal clarification on conflict of interest procedures involving the Collins account. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course. The board was already nervous about my personal connection now. What did you tell him? That legally you're fine as long as you disclose the relationship. I nodded slowly. And emotionally, Rebecca snorted softly. Emotionally, I told him if he lets Harold Collins anywhere near you right now, I'll personally bury him in paperwork. I laughed despite myself. God, I needed that laugh. You know, Rebecca said carefully, there's another layer to all this. What do you mean she didn't just insult you, Lindsay? I waited. She insulted every older woman who sacrificed her life for family and didn't package herself like luxury branding afterward. That hit something deep inside me, because she was right. Vanessa viewed aging women like failed products unless they remained socially impressive, stylish, wealthy-looking, useful, and somehow that felt uglier than the word unemployed itself. After we hung up, I stayed at the cemetery another 20 minutes. By the time I returned home, evening shadows had begun stretching across the neighborhood, and sitting directly in front of my house was a white Mercedes SUV. Vanessa, I nearly kept driving. Honestly, part of me wanted to, but another part wanted to hear what she'd say when stripped of performance and witnesses. As soon as I parked, Vanessa climbed out quickly. Even from a distance, I could tell she'd been crying. Mascara smudged, hair rushed into a loose ponytail, designer sunglasses despite cloudy weather, armor for women who fear looking imperfect. Lindsay, she said immediately as I stepped out of the car. I locked my door calmly. What are you doing here? Please don't shut me out. Interesting choice of words. As though boundaries were cruelty. I walked toward the porch slowly without inviting her inside. Vanessa followed nervously. I know you're upset. Upset. Another minimizing word. I unlocked my front door. I'm more than upset. She swallowed hard. I made a mistake. You humiliated me. I didn't think it would come across that way. I turned toward her slowly. How exactly did you think unemployed widow would sound? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Because there was no answer to that. Vanessa's eyes filled again. My parents are difficult. So you sacrificed me to impress them? That's not fair. No, I said quietly. What happened at dinner wasn't fair. She rubbed her hands together anxiously. You don't understand how they judge people. I almost laughed. Oh, I understand perfectly now. No, you don't. Her voice cracked suddenly. You have no idea what it's like growing up around people who only value success. That stopped me. Not because I agreed with her behavior, because for the first time I heard genuine fear underneath the manipulation. Vanessa looked around my modest living room awkwardly. You're comfortable living like this, she whispered. Like this. There it was again. This house. This life. This simplicity. I folded my arms. What's wrong with my life, Vanessa? Her eyes widened immediately. I didn't mean, yes, you did. Silence stretched between us. Finally, she whispered the truth. My parents think simple means unsuccessful. I stared at her carefully. And you believe them? Her eyes dropped. That was answer enough. I walked farther into the living room slowly. You know what's interesting? Vanessa looked up nervously. You spent years trying to make me smaller. I looked directly at her. But I was never the small one in this situation. Tears rolled down her cheeks now. Please. Harold's company, and there it was. The real reason she came, not guilt. Fear. Fear of losing status. Fear of collapse. Fear of consequences. I suddenly felt incredibly tired again. You still don't understand, I said softly. What? This was never about the company. Vanessa stared at me helplessly. I continued quietly. This was about the moment my son looked at me sitting there humiliated and decided your comfort mattered more than my dignity. That landed hard, because unlike Ethan, Vanessa understood emotional leverage instantly. Her face crumpled. I never wanted him to choose between us, but you made him. Silence. Then something changed in her expression. Very small, very fast, but I saw it. Calculation. The moment she realized emotional apologies weren't working, so she changed tactics, and that's when I finally understood exactly who my daughter-in-law truly was. Vanessa's entire posture changed right in front of me. It was subtle. Most people probably wouldn't have noticed it, but I spent decades negotiating with executives, investors, and desperate businessmen trying to hide panic behind polished smiles. You learn to recognize the exact second someone stops speaking emotionally and starts strategizing. The tears remained. The shaky voice remained. But suddenly her eyes became alert, calculating. "I think we both got off on the wrong foot," she said carefully. "There it is," I thought. The pivot. I stayed standing near the living room window while Vanessa sat stiffly on the edge of my couch like she was performing vulnerability instead of feeling it. "You humiliated me in front of your family," I said quietly. "That's not a misunderstanding. That's a choice." Vanessa pressed her lips together. I was under pressure. A lot of people live under pressure without degrading others. She looked down immediately. For a moment, silence filled the room except for the ticking clock near the fireplace. Then Vanessa sighed softly and switched tactics completely. "You know, she said Ethan really looks up to you." I almost laughed. Interesting. Now she was using emotional flattery. "I'm sure he does," I replied calmly. "He does," she insisted quickly. "He talks about how strong you are all the time. Strong enough to survive being labeled unemployed at your dinner table?" Her face tightened again. I said I was sorry. "No," I corrected softly. "You said you didn't mean it that way." "That's different." That irritated her. I saw it flash across her face before she controlled it again. People who manipulate others hate precision. They survive inside blurry language. Vanessa crossed her legs carefully. "My parents can be old-fashioned. Your parents didn't print that card." Silence. She looked away. "Got you." I walked slowly toward the kitchen. "Would you like coffee?" She blinked, surprised by the offer. "No, thank you." I nodded and poured myself some anyway. Vanessa watched me carefully while I moved around the kitchen. I realized then that she probably never really looked at me before. Not truly. To her, I'd always been background scenery, Ethan's older mother. Quiet widow, emotionally useful babysitter someday, maybe. Nothing more. Now she was trying to reevaluate me in real time, and it terrified her. "You never told anyone who you really were," she said suddenly. I leaned against the counter. "What does that mean?" "You know what I mean?" "No," I replied calmly. "Explain it." She hesitated. "You let everyone think you were just what, another pause? Retired?" "Interesting. Not retired. Just retired. Like ordinary people required a qualifier." I took a sip of coffee slowly. "I am retired." "You know what I mean?" "No," I repeated softly. "I really don't." Vanessa's composure slipped slightly. "I mean, successful?" There it was. Finally honest. I nodded once. "So, because I don't wear designer labels and brag about investments, you assumed I had no value. That's not fair." "Isn't it?" Her jaw tightened. "You judged me too." I almost smiled. "No, Vanessa. I observed you. That's the same thing." "No. Judging is deciding someone's worth based on appearances." I tilted my head slightly. "Observation is recognizing patterns." Her eyes narrowed faintly. "What patterns?" I set my coffee cup down carefully. "You never asked about my life unless money was involved." She looked defensive immediately. "That's not true. It absolutely is." I started counting calmly on my fingers. "You asked about my house value, my insurance, my investments, my will, my retirement." Her face flushed. "But you never once asked what it was like raising Ethan alone after Miguel died." Silence. "You never asked how many jobs I worked." Silence. "You never asked what sacrifices built the life your husband now enjoys." She looked genuinely uncomfortable now. Good. People should feel uncomfortable when they finally encounter truth. Vanessa stood abruptly and walked toward the dining room like she suddenly needed movement. "I grew up differently than you," she muttered. "I know. My parents care about image, I know. You act like that's easy." I stared at her. "You think being widowed at 39 was easy?" That hit her hard enough to stop her pacing. The room fell silent again. Then Vanessa did something unexpected. She laughed bitterly, small, sharp, exhausted. You know what the worst part is? She asked quietly. I waited. My parents actually liked you. That surprised me. They thought you were humble, she continued, graceful, quiet. I almost smiled at the irony. Quiet women are often admired right up until they stop accepting disrespect. Vanessa folded her arms tightly across herself. Then Harold found out this morning who you actually were. There it was again. Who you actually were, as if my value only existed now because money had been discovered. And suddenly I asked softly. Her face darkened. Suddenly my father's terrified. I nodded slowly. Of course he was. She looked at me desperately now. You have to understand what's happening. No, I said quietly. You have to understand what happened. That stopped her cold. I walked toward the hallway slowly. Last night your family believed I was powerless. You weren't powerless. But you thought I was. Vanessa said nothing. Do you know why that matters? I asked. Her eyes followed me nervously. Because the way people treat those they think can do nothing for them reveals their true character. I paused. And your family failed that test spectacularly. Her breathing became shallow. Please don't destroy my father over one mistake. There it was. The real fear. Not emotional damage. Financial consequences. I looked directly at her. Your father's company was already collapsing before I ever walked into that restaurant. That deal is our only chance. Our. Interesting word. Not his company, not his employees. Our chance. Meaning her lifestyle, her status, her world. I suddenly understood something much darker. Vanessa wasn't terrified of poverty. She was terrified of losing social position. And those are very different fears. I walked back toward the living room slowly. You know what I think. She swallowed nervously. I think you spent years building your identity around appearances because deep down, you're terrified nobody would value you without them. Her face changed instantly. That landed hard. You don't know me. I think I do. Her eyes filled again, but this time anger mixed with the tears. You have no idea what my parents are like. You're 35 years old, Vanessa. She flinched. At some point, adulthood requires accountability. You think you're better than me? No, I said honestly. I think I survived things that taught me what actually matters. That silence stretched long between us. Then Vanessa made a mistake. A very important mistake. Her voice softened carefully. If Harold loses this deal, Ethan suffers too. Ah, there it is. Manipulation through guilt. I stayed perfectly still. Vanessa stepped closer. He's your son. Yes. You'd really risk hurting him over hurt feelings. Hurt feelings? I almost admired the audacity. Reduce humiliation, disrespect, and emotional betrayal into hurt feelings. My voice became very calm. You still think this is about emotion? What else would it be about? I looked directly into her eyes. Character. That unsettled her immediately, because suddenly she realized something terrifying. I wasn't reacting emotionally anymore. I was evaluating. The same way I evaluated executives' partnerships and investment risks, and Vanessa finally understood the danger in that. She tried one last time. If you help Harold, we can move past this. We move past this. Like dignity was negotiable. Like respect could be bought retroactively. And in that exact moment, I made a decision. Not about the investment. About her. About who she truly was beneath the polished image. I walked to the bookshelf beside the fireplace and reached for my phone resting there. Vanessa's eyes followed the movement nervously. Then I pressed one button calmly. Record. The small red light appeared on screen. Vanessa frowned. What are you doing? I looked directly at her. You said you wanted to explain, and for the first time since she arrived, my daughter-in-law looked genuinely afraid. Vanessa stared at my phone like it was a weapon. In a way, I suppose it was. Not because of the recording itself, because manipulative people fear documentation more than confrontation. You're recording me, she asked carefully. You wanted to explain yourself. That's insane. No, I replied calmly. What happened at dinner was insane. Her eyes darted toward the front door for half a second. Calculating escape, calculating risk, calculating damage. I'd seen that exact expression across boardroom tables from executives trying to decide whether honesty or performance would save them more efficiently. I sat down slowly in the armchair near the fireplace. Please, I said softly, go ahead. Vanessa remained standing. I'm not comfortable being recorded. Interesting, I said. I wasn't comfortable being publicly humiliated either. Silence. She crossed her arms tightly. You're trying to trap me. No, I corrected. I'm trying to understand you honestly for the first time. That unsettled her more than anger would have. People like Vanessa know how to fight rage. Calmness terrifies them, because calm people think clearly. Finally, she sat down stiffly across from me. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Vanessa sighed dramatically. My father's company is in serious trouble. Straight to business, of course. I folded my hands in my lap. I know. Her eyes widened slightly. How much do you know enough? She swallowed hard. Then you know this investment matters. I know your father buried financial instability beneath image management for years. That hit her visibly. He didn't bury anything. He manipulated appearances. Another silence. Again, that tiny flicker of fear crossed her face. Because she knew I was right. Vanessa leaned forward suddenly. My father built everything from nothing. So did I. That stopped her. The difference was simple. Her family believed struggle became meaningful only after wealth arrived. Mine believed struggle itself carried dignity. You don't understand what's at stake, she whispered. Your father's company, our lives. There it was again. Our lives, not employees, not responsibility, lifestyle, image, security. I looked around my own modest living room slowly before answering. You think losing status is the same thing as losing survival? Her jaw tightened. You're judging me again. No, I said quietly. I'm finally seeing you clearly. Vanessa stood abruptly and began pacing. You know what, fine? Yes. My parents care about appearances. She turned toward me sharply. Because appearances matter. I stayed silent. They determine opportunities, respect, access. No, I said calmly. Money determines access. Character determines respect. She laughed bitterly. That's easy to say when you secretly have both. Secretly. I almost smiled. Interesting choice of word. As opposed to publicly pretending to have both. Her face flushed instantly. Good. Truth tends to land hardest on insecure people. Vanessa shook her head. You don't understand how humiliating this is for me. I blinked slowly. For you? Yes. Her composure finally cracked completely. My parents spent years looking down on people, and now they realize they insulted someone more successful than all of us. Ah, there it was. Not remorse. Embarrassment. I leaned back in my chair. So your problem isn't what you did. She froze. It's that you did it to the wrong person. The silence after that sentence felt enormous. Vanessa looked genuinely shaken now, because somewhere deep down she understood I had just spoken the absolute truth. I continued quietly. If I really had been poor or retired, and dependent, none of you would have cared. That's not true. Then why did everyone panic only after learning who I was? She had no answer. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. A summer storm was moving into Atlanta. The house dimmed slightly as clouds covered the late afternoon sun. Vanessa sat down again slowly. Smaller now, not humble, just frightened. You don't know what my father said this morning, she whispered. I waited. He called me irresponsible, reckless, said I jeopardized everything. A humorless smile touched my mouth. Interesting. Harold Collins had no problem humiliating me when he believed I was powerless. Now suddenly dignity mattered. I folded my arms quietly. Do you know why wealthy people like your parents fear humiliation so much? Vanessa looked exhausted. Why? Because their identity depends on being admired. The room fell silent again. Then I asked softly, what happens to you if people stop envying your life? That question hit her harder than anything else I'd said. I watched it happen in real time, the pause, the fear, the tiny fracture in her expression, because beneath all the designer clothes and polished confidence, Vanessa Collins Rivera had absolutely no idea who she was without status. She looked down at her wedding ring suddenly. I worked hard too, she said quietly. That surprised me. I softened slightly. I'm sure you did. My parents controlled everything growing up. Her voice sounded distant now. Grades, clothes, friends, weight, internships. Every mistake became public humiliation. I listened carefully, not because it excused her behavior, but because pain explains people even when it doesn't justify them. Vanessa rubbed her hands together nervously. You know what my mother used to say? I waited. She said women without status disappear. The sentence settled heavily between us, and suddenly, for the first time, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Because I could finally see the machinery underneath her cruelty. Fear. Fear of becoming invisible. Fear of becoming ordinary. Fear of becoming me. Except she never understood something important. I was never invisible. She simply lacked the depth to recognize quiet strength. You spent the entire dinner trying to make yourself look bigger, I said softly. Her eyes lifted toward mine. But confident people don't need smaller people around them to feel important. Tears slid down her cheeks again. Real tears this time. Not strategic ones. Do you hate me? She whispered. I thought about that carefully. No. She looked surprised. I think you're emotionally starving, I said honestly. That broke something inside her face immediately, because manipulative people often survive by never hearing truth spoken gently. Vanessa looked away quickly. I do love Ethan. I believe you. But love without respect becomes possession. She stared at me silently. I continued. You trained my son to prioritize your comfort over honesty. I never asked him to hurt you. No, I agreed quietly. You just rewarded him every time he avoided confronting you. That landed hard, because she knew exactly what I meant. Ethan's silence at dinner hadn't happened overnight. It had been conditioned. Years of tension avoidance, years of emotional management, years of rewarding compliance. Vanessa wiped her face angrily. You make me sound manipulative. I held her gaze steadily. You are manipulative. The honesty stunned her silent. I leaned forward slightly. And the worst part, I don't even think you realize how often you do it. Thunder cracked louder outside now. Rain began tapping softly against the windows. The room suddenly felt very small, very intimate, very honest. Vanessa looked exhausted. What happens now? Finally, the real question. Not about money, not about the board, not about Harold, about consequences. I picked up my phone slowly and stopped the recording. Then I looked directly at my daughter-in-law. That depends on whether anyone in your family is finally capable of telling the truth. Her breathing became shallow. What truth? I stood slowly. The truth about who you all became when you thought I had nothing? At that exact moment, headlights swept across my living room windows from outside. Another car pulling into my driveway. Vanessa's face immediately changed. Fear. Real fear. Because somehow, she already knew who it was. Vanessa turned toward the front window so quickly her chair scraped against the hardwood floor. Headlights cut through the rain outside before the engine shut off. For a brief second, nobody moved. Then Vanessa whispered, "Oh my God." I already knew. Harold Collins. Of course. Manipulative families rarely send one person unless the situation becomes truly desperate. A second car pulled in behind the first. Black sedan, professional, controlled. Marcus Hale stepped out holding an umbrella. Now that surprised me. Vanessa looked completely panicked. Why is Marcus here? Interesting. She recognized him immediately, which meant Harold had already explained exactly how much danger they were in. I walked calmly toward the front door. Behind me, Vanessa stood frozen. Lindsey, please. I opened the door before she finished. Rain hammered the porch roof overhead, while Harold Collins climbed the steps looking nothing like the composed businessman from dinner. His expensive suit was damp, his silver hair slightly disheveled, and for the first time since meeting him, he looked old, truly old. Fear ages people fast. Marcus stood slightly behind him, expression unreadable. Lindsey, Harold said tightly, I apologize for showing up unannounced. No, you don't, I replied calmly. That stunned him silent immediately. Good. No more polished lies tonight. I stepped aside anyway. Come in. Harold entered carefully, immediately spotting Vanessa standing stiffly near the living room. Their eyes met, and in that brief glance I saw everything. Blame, panic, humiliation. Marcus removed his wet coat near the doorway. I'm only here as an observer, he said carefully. Smart man. He understood this wasn't really about business anymore. Harold looked around my house awkwardly. I almost smiled watching it happen. 2 nights ago, this home represented embarrassment to them. Now it felt dangerous. Funny how power changes perception. Would anyone like coffee, I asked. Nobody answered. Interesting. Fear kills appetite quickly. I sat down calmly in the same armchair as before, while the others remained standing for several uncomfortable seconds. Finally, Marcus sat near the fireplace. Harold stayed standing. Control tactic. People who fear vulnerability often avoid physically lowering themselves. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly near the window. I looked at Harold directly. So. He swallowed hard. I owe you an apology. No, I said softly. You owe me honesty. The room went silent. Rain tapped steadily against the windows while thunder rolled faintly in the distance. Harold finally sat down across from me. Good. Now we could actually talk. I was disrespectful at dinner, he admitted carefully. You were condescending. His jaw tightened slightly. Yes. You assumed I depended financially on Ethan. Another pause. Yes. I nodded slowly. And if Marcus hadn't informed you who I was this morning? Harold looked away immediately. There was the answer. Marcus remained silent in the corner, wisely refusing involvement. Vanessa suddenly stepped forward. Dad didn't know I raised one hand gently. No. Let him answer. Harold looked deeply uncomfortable now. Good again. Discomfort reveals character faster than luxury ever does. Finally, he exhaled heavily. No, he admitted quietly. I probably wouldn't have reconsidered my behavior. Truth. Finally. And strangely enough, that honesty softened me more than all the rehearsed apologies earlier, because at least now we were speaking plainly. I leaned back slowly. Do you know what upset me most? Harold shook his head carefully. It wasn't the insult. His forehead furrowed slightly. It was how quickly all of you assigned value to me based on appearance. Vanessa stared at the floor. I continued calmly. You saw an older woman in a modest dress driving an older car and immediately built an entire story about who I was? Harold rubbed his hands together nervously. That wasn't intentional. Yes, it was. Silence again. Because truth sounds brutal when people are used to hiding inside polite language. Marcus finally spoke quietly. We all profile people sometimes. I looked at him. Yes, but decent people feel ashamed when they realize they were wrong. That landed heavily in the room, especially on Vanessa. Harold cleared his throat awkwardly. I understand why you're angry. No, I corrected softly. You understand why you're afraid? His eyes lifted sharply toward mine. There it is. That was the sentence nobody else had been willing to say out loud. Fear, not guilt. Fear. Fear for his company. Fear for his reputation. Fear of consequences. Harold looked exhausted suddenly. My company employs hundreds of people. Ah. The moral pivot? Appeal to responsibility. I almost admired the timing. Yes, I said quietly, and you still built it on reckless financial decisions designed to maintain appearances. Marcus shifted slightly in his seat. Harold looked defensive instantly. You don't understand the market pressures. I understand ego-driven expansion perfectly. That hit. Hard. Because men like Harold built entire identities around appearing powerful, and nothing threatens them more than someone calmly identifying insecurity beneath ambition. Vanessa stepped closer to her father protectively. He made mistakes, okay? I looked directly at her. Everyone makes mistakes. Then I paused. But not everyone humiliates people they believe are beneath them. The room fell silent again. Marcus watched all of us carefully now, observing, evaluating, probably wondering whether this family disaster could still remain professionally manageable. Harold leaned forward heavily. What do you want from us? That question almost broke my heart, because he still thought this was transactional. I stared at him quietly for several seconds. Then I answered honestly. I wanted my son to defend me. Silence. Complete silence. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. Harold looked toward the floor. Even Marcus softened slightly. Because underneath all the money power and business tension, that was the real tragedy. A mother sitting silently while her child allowed others to diminish her. My voice became quieter. I spent decades making sure Ethan never felt small after Miguel died. I swallowed carefully, and then I sat at that table while all of you made me feel invisible. Vanessa's breathing became uneven again. Harold looked genuinely uncomfortable now, not strategically uncomfortable, human uncomfortable. Good. Maybe we were finally reaching something real. Then Vanessa ruined it. We said we were sorry. The instant defensiveness in her voice changed the room immediately. I looked at her calmly. No. You said sorry after learning my identity had value to you. That's not fair. It's exactly fair. Vanessa's composure snapped. You act like we committed some horrible crime? Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Even Harold looked alarmed now. I stayed perfectly calm. You publicly stripped another woman of dignity to elevate yourself socially. Vanessa threw her hands up angrily. Oh my God, it was one stupid card. There it was. Finally. The truth underneath the apologies. Minimization. Because people who don't truly respect your pain always reduce it once sympathy stops working. One stupid card, I repeated softly. Vanessa realized too late what she'd exposed. Harold turned toward her sharply. Vanessa, no, she snapped suddenly. Everyone's acting like I destroyed her life. I stood slowly, and somehow my calmness frightened her more than yelling ever could. You know what's fascinating? I asked quietly. Nobody answered. You still believe this situation is about protecting your family from me? I looked directly at Vanessa. When actually this entire time, I paused. I've been deciding whether your family deserves protection from itself. Silence crashed through the room. Rain hammered harder outside now. Thunder shook faintly through the windows. Harold looked stunned. Marcus stared at me carefully. Vanessa's face slowly drained of color, because for the first time, she finally understood the real danger here. Not the investment, not the board, not even public embarrassment. The danger was that someone in the room could finally see all of them clearly. And I wasn't impressed. Nobody spoke for several seconds after that. The rain outside came down harder now, rattling against the windows, while thunder rolled low across the Atlanta sky. Inside my living room, the silence felt suffocating. Vanessa stood frozen near the fireplace, her breathing shallow and uneven. Harold looked like a man realizing too late that charm and money couldn't control every situation. And Marcus? Marcus was watching everyone with the calm expression of someone observing a company collapse from inside the boardroom. Finally, Harold cleared his throat. What exactly does that mean? I looked at him steadily. It means your family has spent so long performing success that none of you know how to function honestly anymore. Vanessa flinched immediately. Harold's jaw tightened. That's unfair. No, Marcus said quietly from the corner. Actually, it's not. All eyes turned toward him. Interesting moment. Because suddenly the only person in the room with no emotional attachment had become the most credible voice there. Marcus folded his hands calmly. Harold, your company's financial reports have been manipulated to preserve appearances for almost 3 years. Harold stiffened. That's an exaggeration. No, Marcus replied evenly. It's documentation. Vanessa looked between them nervously. I stayed silent, because now the truth was unfolding without my help. Marcus continued carefully. You expanded aggressively while hiding instability because you believed image would buy time. Harold's face darkened. That's how business works. No, Marcus corrected calmly. That's how ego works. The room went still again, and for the first time since entering my house, Harold Collins looked genuinely ashamed. Not embarrassed. Ashamed. There's a difference. Embarrassment fears exposure. Shame recognizes truth. Vanessa suddenly looked exhausted, like years of emotional pressure were finally crushing down all at once. I didn't know things were this bad, she whispered. Harold looked at her sharply. You knew enough. I knew we were stressed. You knew we were drowning. That stunned her. I could see it immediately. Vanessa genuinely hadn't realized how close the company was to collapse. Interesting. Families built on image often hide truth even from each other. Marcus sighed quietly. The board was already divided before this situation happened. Harold looked toward him desperately, but there's still a chance. Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced toward me. Everyone did. Because now the reality sat heavily in the room. I had influence, real influence. And suddenly every person there understood exactly how dangerous their behavior at dinner had been. Vanessa sat down slowly, like her legs no longer trusted her. Then she looked directly at me for the first time all evening. Not at my clothes, not at my house. At me. I really did hurt you, she whispered. The sincerity surprised me. Not completely sincere, but sincere enough to matter. I nodded slowly. Yes. Tears filled her eyes again. My mother used to humiliate me in front of people when I was younger. That caught everyone off guard. Even Harold looked startled. Vanessa laughed weakly through tears. If I gained weight, she commented on it publicly. If my grades slipped, she compared me to other girls. Patricia Collins suddenly made terrible sense to me. Vanessa wiped her face angrily. She always said perception was survival. Harold looked uncomfortable. Your mother wanted the best for you. No, Vanessa snapped suddenly. She wanted perfection. The room went silent again, and suddenly I could see the generational damage unfolding right in front of me. Patricia humiliated Vanessa. Vanessa learned humiliation was normal. Then she passed it forward, not because pain excuses cruelty, but because wounded people often repeat emotional patterns before they recognize them. Marcus quietly stood. I'm going to give everyone a minute. Smart again. He slipped into the kitchen, leaving the rest of us alone. Harold rubbed both hands over his face heavily. I failed my family, he muttered. That surprised me too, not because it wasn't true, because men like Harold rarely say things like that out loud. Vanessa looked at him with tears still falling. You taught us appearances mattered more than honesty. Harold closed his eyes briefly, and I was wrong. Those words seemed to physically pain him. I watched silently. Part of me still felt angry, deeply angry. But another part saw something painfully human underneath all the arrogance. Fear. Fear of becoming irrelevant. Fear of failure. Fear of social collapse. The same fear that shaped Vanessa. The same fear that infected Ethan. Status obsession wasn't really about luxury. It was about terror. Terror that without achievement, admiration, or money, nobody would love you. I suddenly felt incredibly sad for all of them. Then Ethan arrived. The front door opened abruptly before anyone reacted. Rain soaked through his jacket as he stepped inside, looking panicked. Vanessa, his eyes immediately landed on me. Then Harold. Then the tension in the room. What's happening? Nobody answered immediately. Vanessa stood quickly. We were talking. Ethan looked deeply confused. Then his eyes landed on my phone sitting beside me on the coffee table, and something in his expression changed instantly. Fear. What did you record? Vanessa looked away immediately. Ah, there it is. Ethan turned toward me slowly. Mom? I held his gaze calmly. Your wife explained herself. His jaw tightened. Vanessa. She crossed her arms defensively. What I was trying to fix things. No, he said quietly. You were trying to manage damage. That surprised all of us. Especially Vanessa. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, Ethan wasn't protecting her automatically. Vanessa stared at him. You think I'm the villain now? I think you cared more about appearances than people. Her face crumpled immediately. You're taking her side. And there it was. The language of emotionally manipulative relationships. Sides, not truth, not accountability, teams. Ethan looked exhausted. There shouldn't have been sides in the first place. Good. Finally. Vanessa shook her head bitterly. You have no idea what this has done to my family. Ethan laughed once without humor. No, Vanessa, I think for the first time in my life I finally do. The room went completely still, because that sentence carried something important underneath it. Awareness. Painful awareness. Ethan turned toward me slowly. I keep replaying dinner in my head. I said nothing. I watched them talk down to you. His voice shook now, and I stayed quiet because I was scared of conflict. Tears filled his eyes again. I became the kind of man Dad would have hated. That one hurt, because he was right. Miguel valued kindness fiercely. Not weakness disguised as peacekeeping, kindness. Different thing entirely. Harold quietly stood from the couch. I should leave. Nobody stopped him. He looked older now than when he'd arrived. Smaller, too. Not financially. Humanly. Before reaching the door, he turned toward me carefully. I was wrong about you. I held his gaze. No, I said softly. You were wrong about what makes someone valuable. That landed hard enough to silence the room again. Harold gave a small nod. Then he left. The front door closed quietly behind him. For several seconds, only rain filled the silence. Vanessa suddenly looked completely lost. Not angry anymore. Not polished, just lost. And Ethan? Ethan looked at me like a little boy again, like someone terrified he'd damaged something precious beyond repair. Mom, he whispered. I looked at him quietly, and for the first time since that dinner, I saw genuine shame in my son's eyes. Not fear, not panic, not damage control. Shame, which meant maybe, Just maybe there was still hope for him after all. After Harold left, nobody moved for a while. The rain outside softened into a steady rhythm against the windows, but inside my living room, everything still felt raw and exposed. Marcus remained quietly in the kitchen, giving us space. Vanessa sat rigidly on the couch with swollen eyes and trembling hands. And Ethan? My son looked completely shattered. Not because the company was collapsing, not because his marriage was strained, because for the first time in his life, he had finally seen himself clearly. That kind of realization changes people, or destroys them. Sometimes both. "Mom," he said again softly. I looked at him without answering. Ethan took a slow step forward. "I don't know how to fix this." There was something painfully honest about the way he said it. No rehearsed apology, no excuses, just helplessness. I sat down slowly in the armchair again because suddenly I felt older than I had in years. Not weak, just tired. "You can't fix it quickly," I said quietly. Ethan nodded immediately like he already knew that. "I know." Silence stretched between us. Then he whispered, "I became a coward." Vanessa flinched sharply beside him. Interesting. Not because he insulted himself, because he finally stopped protecting her emotionally. Ethan dragged both hands down his face slowly. I kept telling myself I was keeping peace. His voice cracked. But I was really just protecting myself from discomfort? Yes, exactly that. I watched him carefully. "You know what your father used to say about courage?" Ethan shook his head slightly. He said courage usually sounds quiet. A faint tear slid down my cheek before I continued. Not dramatic, not loud, just one person deciding something matters more than fear. Ethan closed his eyes. And I failed. "Yes," I said honestly. Vanessa inhaled sharply at the bluntness, but Ethan nodded slowly. "Because truth hurts less once someone finally stops running from it." "I watched them humiliate you," he whispered, and all I cared about was getting through dinner without conflict. The pain in his voice was real now. Good. Real pain means real awareness. I was ashamed of myself the second you left that restaurant. I stayed silent. Then when Harold called me the next morning, panicking about the board, he laughed bitterly. That's when I realized how fake all of it was. I tilted my head slightly. "What do you mean?" "My entire marriage suddenly became about damage control?" Vanessa looked down immediately. Ethan continued slowly, like each sentence physically hurt. "Not one conversation was about you." That sentence landed heavily in the room, because it was true. Every conversation since the dinner had revolved around consequences, business, status, exposure. Nobody had truly centered the emotional wound itself, not even Ethan at first. He looked directly at me now, and I hate that it took fear for me to finally wake up. I believed him. That was the tragedy. I really believed him. Vanessa suddenly stood. "So what?" now she asked quietly. Nobody answered immediately. She looked between us helplessly. "Are we just pretending I'm evil now?" I sighed softly. "No, Vanessa." Her eyes filled again. "Then what am I?" For a second I almost answered immediately. Manipulative, status-obsessed, emotionally immature, but instead I looked at her carefully, and what I saw underneath everything surprised me. Fear, not malice. Fear dressed up as superiority. "You're someone who learned to measure worth incorrectly," I said quietly. That hit her hard enough to make her sit back down. "You were taught appearances equal value." Tears rolled silently down her face, and now, I glanced around the room slowly. "Now you're discovering what happens when life removes appearances from the equation." The room went still again. Marcus quietly re-entered, carrying coffee mugs none of us had asked for. God bless that man. He handed one to me gently before sitting near the fireplace again. Nobody spoke for nearly a full minute. Then Marcus finally broke the silence. "The board meeting is Monday morning, reality returning, harsh and unavoidable." Ethan looked immediately tense again. Vanessa clasped her hands together tightly. Marcus continued carefully. "Harold's company still has a chance." Vanessa looked up quickly. "But it's smaller than before." I already knew why. Trust damage. Investors tolerate losses faster than dishonesty. Marcus looked directly at me. "You still hold deciding influence." Ethan swallowed hard. Vanessa looked terrified again. And suddenly I realized something important. For days now, everyone had been waiting to see whether I would punish them. But oddly enough, I didn't want revenge anymore. That surprised even me. The humiliation still hurt deeply, But somewhere between Ethan's breakdown and Harold's shame and Vanessa's unraveling, my anger had shifted. Not disappeared, shifted. Because revenge changes behavior temporarily, truth changes it permanently. I set my coffee cup down carefully. I'm not going to destroy Harold's company because of personal feelings. Everyone in the room visibly reacted. Vanessa nearly cried from relief. Ethan looked stunned. Marcus only nodded calmly like he expected that answer, but I raised one finger gently. That does not mean there are no consequences. The room tightened again immediately. I looked directly at Ethan first. You allowed your fear of conflict to become cruelty. His eyes filled instantly, then I turned toward Vanessa. And you used humiliation as social currency. She looked away immediately. Finally, I looked toward Marcus. And Harold built a company culture around image instead of honesty. Marcus sighed quietly. That part is unfortunately true. I leaned back slowly. So, no. I won't vote emotionally, Vanessa whispered. Thank you. I looked directly at her. I'm not doing it for you. Silence. I'm doing it because innocent employees shouldn't lose livelihoods over the emotional failures of leadership. That landed hard, especially on Ethan, because he finally understood something about me in that moment. Integrity is what people do when revenge becomes available. Ethan stepped closer slowly. I don't deserve you. That sentence almost broke me, because suddenly he sounded like the little boy who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares, whispering, I'm sorry, Mom. I looked at him quietly for a long time. Then I said the hardest thing I'd said all week. You almost made me regret motherhood for one night. The pain on his face was immediate and devastating. Good. Not because I wanted to hurt him, because some truths should leave scars. I sat there feeling invisible, I whispered. And the person who should have protected me emotionally became another reason I felt alone. Ethan started crying again silently. I know. No, I said softly. I don't think you did. He lowered his head completely. Then something inside me softened slightly. Not fully, but enough. I don't think you're a bad man, Ethan. His eyes lifted immediately. I think you became emotionally weak around the wrong people. Vanessa closed her eyes tightly. She knew that included her. I continued carefully. And weak people can hurt others deeply without ever intending to. The room remained silent except for rain tapping gently outside. Then Ethan whispered, Is there any way to fix this? I thought about that honestly. Relationships aren't repaired through speeches. They're repaired through repeated behavior over time. I don't know yet, I admitted. That answer hurt him. But it was truthful. And after this week, truth mattered more to me than comfort. I slowly stood from my chair. I loved your father because he made me feel safe to exist exactly as I was. I looked directly at Ethan. You need to decide what kind of man you want to become before your marriage destroys the parts of you that still know right from wrong. Vanessa looked shattered by those words. Good. Maybe she needed to hear them too. Because whether their marriage survived or not, something fundamental had already cracked open between them. And deep down, all three of us knew it. Monday morning arrived gray and humid. Atlanta looked washed out beneath heavy clouds as I drove downtown toward Hale's strategic capital. Normally, I enjoyed mornings in the city. The movement, the energy, the feeling that life was always unfolding somewhere beyond your own problems. But that morning, my chest felt strangely heavy. Not because of the board meeting, because I knew nothing would truly return to normal after this. Some relationships survive betrayal, others survive only by becoming something different. And I still didn't know which version Ethan and I would become. When I entered the building lobby, the receptionist immediately smiled. Good morning, Ms. Rivera. I smiled politely back. No pity, no condescension, no assumptions, just respect. Funny how differently the world treats women once power becomes visible. The elevator ride up felt unusually long. By the time I entered the executive conference floor, Marcus was already waiting near the glass boardroom. You okay? He asked quietly. I nodded once. As okay as someone can be after accidentally detonating her son's marriage. Marcus almost smiled. Technically, they detonated it themselves. True. Painfully true. He walked beside me toward the conference room. The board's tense, he admitted. Harold disclosed the personal connection this morning. Good. Marcus glanced at me. Most people in your position would have hidden it. I looked through the glass walls into the boardroom beyond. Most people in my position were never publicly introduced as unemployed widows. That earned a soft laugh from him. Then his expression turned serious again. You know they're expecting retaliation. Of course they were. Because people who weaponize power always assume others will too. That's why integrity confuses them. Inside the conference room, the atmosphere felt tight immediately. Financial analysts shuffled papers. Executives spoke in low voices. Projected numbers glowed across large presentation screens. And at the far end of the room sat Harold Collins. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. When our eyes met, he stood immediately. Not arrogantly this time. Respectfully. Interesting what humility looks like after fear strips ego away. Lindsey, he said quietly. I nodded politely. Harold. No hostility. No warmth either. Just distance. The meeting began 10 minutes later. For nearly an hour, analysts reviewed Collins Development Group's financial exposure, debt projections, restructuring options, asset risks, staffing vulnerabilities. At one point, a younger board member asked bluntly, how did leadership allow things to deteriorate this badly? The silence afterward felt brutal. Harold answered honestly, though, that responsibility belongs to me. Good. Finally. No excuses, no performance, just accountability. And oddly enough, that mattered to me more than perfect financial recovery plans. People can rebuild businesses. Character takes longer. Marcus eventually turned toward me. Lindsey. The room quieted instantly, because everyone already knew my vote carried weight. I folded my hands calmly on the conference table. Collins Development Group can survive, I said evenly. Relief flashed briefly across Harold's face. Then I continued, but not under the same leadership culture. That erased the relief immediately. Several board members nodded slowly. I looked directly at Harold. You built an organization obsessed with appearances while hiding instability. He lowered his eyes. Yes. That culture spread into your family. The room became very still. I continued calmly anyway. When leaders prioritize image over honesty, eventually everyone beneath them learns performance matters more than integrity. Nobody interrupted me, because deep down, they all knew I wasn't only talking about business. I recommended conditional approval, emergency investment funding, mandatory oversight, leadership restructuring, ethics review, and most importantly, transparency requirements. By the time the vote ended, the company had survived. Barely. But Harold Collins no longer looked victorious. He looked humbled. As everyone slowly began leaving the room, Harold approached me carefully. I won't forget this. I looked at him quietly. Don't misunderstand me. His expression tightened slightly. I didn't save your company for you. He nodded slowly. I know. I did it because innocent employees deserve better than leadership failures. Pain crossed his face. Good. Truth should remain uncomfortable. Before leaving, Harold hesitated, then quietly said, You were right about my daughter. That surprised me. I waited. I taught her to fear being ordinary. The honesty in his voice sounded devastating. And now, he gave a tired smile without humor. Now, I think I raised someone who doesn't know how to feel safe without admiration. That sentence stayed with me long after he walked away, because it was tragically accurate. By late afternoon, I finally returned home exhausted, emotionally more than physically, for the first time in days. The house felt peaceful again, not healed, but quieter. I changed into comfortable clothes, made tea, and sat on the back porch watching rainwater drip slowly from the trees. Around sunset, my phone buzzed. Ethan. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. Hello? His voice sounded cautious. How did the meeting go? The company survived. A long exhale of relief came through the phone. Thank you. I leaned back slowly in my chair. I didn't do it for your marriage, Ethan. I know. Silence stretched softly between us. Then he surprised me. I moved out. I sat upright immediately. What I got a hotel for now? My chest tightened unexpectedly. Not relief. Sadness. Deep sadness. What happened? Ethan laughed weakly. We had our first honest conversation in years. That sounded dangerous, and she admitted she doesn't know who she is without her parents' approval. I closed my eyes briefly. Poor girl. Poor foolish girl. And you. Another pause. I realized I don't know who I am when I'm trying to keep everyone happy. That hurt to hear, because it was true. Ethan had spent years shape-shifting emotionally depending on who demanded comfort from him. Wife, bosses, in-laws, even me sometimes. Anyone except himself. I'm not divorcing her, he said quickly. At least not now. I didn't ask you to. I know. His voice sounded exhausted, but I can't go back to pretending everything's okay either. That was growth. Painful growth, but real. We spoke quietly for a few more minutes before hanging up. Afterward, I sat alone on the porch thinking about how strange families become over time. You spend years trying to protect the people you love from pain. Then, one day, you realize pain was the only thing finally teaching them truth. That evening, Rebecca came over with Chinese takeout and wine. "Board meeting survivor dinner," she announced dramatically. I laughed for the first time in what felt like forever. We sat in my kitchen eating lo mein from cartons while thunder rolled softly outside again. At one point, Rebecca looked at me carefully. So what? Now I thought about that honestly. Then I looked around my old kitchen. Miguel's clock still ticking. The same worn cabinets, the same house everyone judged so quickly. And suddenly I realized something important. I was done shrinking myself to make insecure people comfortable. Completely done. I think I said slowly, "I want to do something useful with all this." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "What kind of useful?" I stared quietly out the window for a moment. There are so many older women treated like they become invisible after a certain age. Rebecca nodded slowly. Yes. Widows, retired women, mothers who sacrificed everything and then got discarded emotionally. The idea settled inside me all at once. Clear, certain, powerful. I looked back at Rebecca. I think I want to build something for them. And for the first time since that horrible dinner, I finally felt something stronger than humiliation. Purpose. 1 year later, my life looked nothing like it had before that dinner. And strangely enough, that turned out to be a blessing. The Lindsey Rivera Foundation officially opened 6 months after the Collins disaster. Rebecca helped me handle the legal structure. Marcus quietly funded several early programs, and before long we were providing financial workshops, legal support, and emergency housing assistance for older women facing emotional or financial abandonment. Women's society stopped seeing once they became inconvenient. Widows, retired teachers, grandmothers pushed aside after years of sacrifice, women who spent entire lifetimes building families only to discover love sometimes disappears the moment usefulness does. The first support meeting nearly broke me, not because it was sad, because it was familiar. One woman cried while describing how her children treated her like outdated furniture after retirement. Another whispered that her son stopped inviting her to dinner because she embarrassed his wealthy wife. A 70-year-old former nurse admitted she felt invisible unless someone needed free childcare. Story after story, different faces, same wound. And sitting there listening to them, I realized something powerful. Humiliation ages women faster than time ever does. Not wrinkles, not gray hair. Disrespect. That's what steals light from people, so we built something different. Somewhere older women could feel seen again, respected again, human again. Ironically, the media became interested in the foundation after a business magazine quietly published an article about the Collins development restructuring. They called me the silent investor who saved a company after being publicly humiliated. I hated that headline. Not because it was inaccurate, because women's pain always becomes entertainment eventually. Still, the publicity helped the foundation grow. Sometimes healing arrives through strange doors. As for Harold Collins, he changed more than I expected. The company survived under strict oversight, but he stepped back from several leadership roles voluntarily. Marcus later told me Harold became far less interested in performing power. Good. Fear humbled him where success never could. Patricia Collins never fully apologized to me directly, but she donated quietly to the foundation twice. No public recognition, no announcement, just checks. Honestly, that told me more than speeches ever could. And Vanessa changed the slowest, painfully slowly. At first, she tried rebuilding her image instead of herself. Therapy quotes online, curated growth journey social media posts, carefully staged vulnerability. I almost laughed when I saw them. Healing is usually much uglier than aesthetics allow, but over time, something genuine finally began happening. Not all at once. In pieces. She started volunteering quietly with women's outreach programs. She stopped posting luxury content constantly, stopped performing perfection. Rebecca called it emotional detox. Maybe she was right. The hardest part for Vanessa wasn't losing status. It was discovering she had no stable identity underneath it. That kind of realization cracks people open, sometimes permanently. As for Ethan, that part took the longest and hurt the deepest. For nearly 3 months after the dinner, we barely spoke beyond occasional texts. Not because I stopped loving him, Because trust heals slower than affection. A child can break their mother's heart even while remaining loved. That's the tragedy nobody prepares women for. Ethan eventually began showing up at my house quietly on Sundays. No speeches, no emotional pressure. He'd mow the lawn, fix things around the house, bring groceries, replace burned-out porch lights. Small things. Consistent things. At first, we spoke cautiously, like strangers rebuilding language after a war. Then, one afternoon, while helping me organize old boxes in the garage, Ethan found one of Miguel's work jackets. He held it silently for a long time. "I think Dad would have been disappointed in me," he said quietly. I looked at him carefully. "No," I answered honestly. "I think he would have expected more from you." That hurt him. Good. Truth should leave marks when necessary. But then I touched his arm gently. "And I think he'd also believe you could become better." Ethan cried harder that day than I'd seen him cry since Miguel's funeral. Not loud, just broken open. And somehow that mattered, because people don't truly change until they grieve the version of themselves they lost. One evening in early spring, Ethan sat with me on the back porch watching the sunset turn the Georgia sky gold. Quiet moment. No tension, no performance, just peace. Then he suddenly asked, "Did you ever regret helping me?" After everything I answered immediately. "No." He looked surprised. I smiled softly. But I regretted forgetting that loving someone doesn't mean accepting disrespect from them. That silence afterward felt important. Like both of us finally understood something we should have learned years earlier. Love without boundaries becomes permission. And mothers are often taught boundaries are selfish. They aren't. They're survival. A few weeks later, the foundation hosted its first large public event downtown. Hundreds of women attended. Some dressed elegantly, some simply, some nervous, some grieving, all carrying invisible stories. Near the end of the evening, I stood on stage beneath warm lights looking out across the crowd. For a moment, I remembered that dinner again. The introduction card, the pity smiles, the word unemployed sitting beneath my name like a verdict. Then I looked at the women in front of me and realized something profound. So many of us spend our lives terrified of becoming invisible, but invisibility only works if we agree to disappear. I stepped closer to the microphone. When my husband died, I said softly, people stopped seeing me as a full person for a while. The room became completely still. They saw a widow, a burden, someone fading. I smiled sadly. And later, after retirement, someone once introduced me as unemployed, like that erased everything I'd ever survived. A few women nodded knowingly. But here's what I learned. I paused. Being unemployed is never shameful. Silence filled the room. Being older is not shameful. More silence. Living simply is not shameful. Several women were crying now. But losing your humanity while chasing status, I said quietly, that's true poverty. The applause afterward felt overwhelming. Not because people admired me, because they understood me. And at 64 years old, that felt more valuable than prestige ever could. Later that night, after the event ended and the crowd disappeared, I sat alone in my car for a moment before driving home. My phone rang. Ethan. I smiled before answering. "Hi, sweetheart." His voice sounded warm. "Hey, Mom." Not rushed, not anxious. Just gentle. "How was your day?" Such a simple question, and somehow, after everything we survived to get there, it sounded like healing. Life teaches painful lessons slowly. Sometimes the people we love most become mirrors reflecting wounds we ignored for years. Sometimes humiliation reveals truths comfort was hiding, and sometimes losing the illusion of respect leads us toward real self-worth for the first time. For a long time, I believed being needed was the same thing as being valued. It isn't. People may need your labor, your money, your silence, your emotional support, and still fail to truly respect your humanity. That's why boundaries matter, especially for mothers, especially for older women. Too many women spend decades sacrificing themselves for family only to feel discarded the moment they stop being useful, impressive, or convenient. But your worth does not disappear with age, retirement, widowhood, or simplicity, and neither does your dignity. One of the hardest lessons I learned was this. Love should never require self-erasure. If someone can only respect you after discovering your status, wealth, or influence, then they never respected you at all. They respected what they thought they could gain from you. Real love sees people clearly before power enters the room. But this story also taught me something hopeful. People can change, not quickly, not magically, but honestly. Ethan had to confront the parts of himself shaped by fear and weakness. Vanessa had to confront the emptiness beneath performance and status. And I had to confront my own habit of accepting disrespect just to keep peace inside the family. Healing began only after truth became unavoidable. So if you're listening to this while feeling unseen dismissed, or emotionally forgotten by the people around you, please remember this. Your quiet life still has value, your sacrifices still matter, and your dignity does not need anyone's permission to exist. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd truly love to know, have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and protecting your self-respect, and where are you watching from tonight?